Welcome to the Wickedly Smart Women podcast, featuring stellar conversations with emerging and established wickedly smart women. Thanks for joining us today as we celebrate women who are committed, care deeply, and have the courage to take action and create conscious change all around the world. Now here's your wickedly smart host, Anjel B. Hartwell.
Welcome to another episode of the Wickedly Smart Women podcast, where we celebrate wickedly smart women and provide our listeners with a wealth of wisdom, along with immediately actionable steps to be smarter, spunkier, and more successful in their impact and their leadership. This is your host, Anjel B. Hartwell, and today we welcome our special guest, Suzanne Jabour. Suzanne is a grieving mom who has found meaning in her loss through providing grief education, sharing how grief really works and how we can support people experiencing it. She works with organizations and businesses to build the skills and protocols to better support people who are grieving at work. She is available as a speaker to share her story and help normalize grief as a healthy response to losses, big and small. She has a BA and BEd and decades of experience as a trainer. She's a certified grief educator, transformational coach, and workshop leader. And I am so delighted to bring you to the show today with this topic. Thank you for coming, Suzanne. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so appreciative to hosts that open up space for this topic that can feel kind of tricky and scary. And we're going to make it not either of those things.
Right. Well, grief has been marginalized in our culture, and particularly in Western culture. Death is also, marginalized. And I love in your bio how you talk about losses big and small. So maybe we, ease our way into this and talk a little bit about what brought you to this path.
Yes, as most grief, activists, educators, counselors, we all seem to come to it from our own experience. And that's certainly the case with me. I had a catastrophic loss in September of 2020 when my 22-year-old son, Ben, died suddenly, unexpectedly. I got that middle of the night call from the police that every parent dreads, and really realized that for my own survival, I had to become a student of grief because I didn't know enough about it to be able to grieve healthfully myself, never mind to be able to support all of the other people that were grieving his loss as well. And even in some cases to have to support people who were trying to support me. Because as a collective, as you say, it's been so marginalized. There's so much fear, so much taboo, and we just don't really know what to say or do. And so we end up saying and doing the wrong things with the best of intentions. So I really realized too that so many of the symptoms I was having made me feel like there was something wrong with me. And I needed to know if there was something wrong with me. I got to the point where I thought, okay, well, my son has died. So that part of my life has fallen apart. I'm no longer the person I was when I went to bed that night before getting the phone call. So I've lost myself. And now I suddenly have some version of instant onset brain disease because my brain doesn't work. Little did I know I had a very typical symptom that many people experience, but no one had talked to me about it. And so I didn't know that's what was coming. So for my own sanity, really, I started to write because I had to get what was spinning out of my head. I had to get what I was learning out of my body. And so I shared, as you do, on Facebook with friends and family. And the response that I got was so overwhelmingly positive because for most people, no one had talked to them about their grief. No one had shared what was really happening. They'd had griefs in their life that no one had talked about. So it really became this kind of symbiotic relationship between, random friends of family on Facebook, because at that point we were still dealing with ongoing COVID issues. So that really was where, for so many of us, we were staying connected. And it became that ability to say, this is what I'm discovering and this is what I've learned. And people would say, oh my gosh, that happened to me. Or, wow, I wonder if that will happen to me. No one's ever told me that before. Or, wow, when I look back, I can really see that happen to someone I cared about, and I didn't know how to help them because I didn't understand what was happening. So that's kind of how I ended up becoming a grief educator, taking that training, because I wanted to understand if my experience was unique or fairly typical, as much as it can be in this universal experience that's different every time. And I really wanted to understand how I could use my ability to speak about it. That actually was helpful to me. And I'm a comfortable speaker. It's not an intimidation for me. So how could I use that to be sure that what had happened to me wasn't for nothing?
Right, right. Well, there's so many different directions I can go here, Suzanne. So I think what I would like to do, just because I personally have had some pretty traumatizing losses as well relative to parenting. I didn't lose my son, but I might as well have lost my son. I'm not comparing myself in any way, but I'm curious if you're willing to go there. Was it a car accident? Was it a drug overdose? Is there, something else that happened to Ben when he passed?
Yeah, Ben lost his battle with depression.
Okay.
So he had a terminal case of depression, and I very purposefully choose to call it that.
Right.
Because mental health is the only disease where when it's terminal, we call the death something else.
Right. Okay.
So what we need to do if we want to break that stigma is call it for what it is.
Understood.
If he had cancer, I would say he lost his battle with cancer. Right. In his case, it was about mental health, and he lost his battle with depression.
Understood. Okay. Right. So in my own case, my child made multiple attempts to be done on the planet. So I understand that part of the journey at the very least. So when he passed, were you still a mother to other children, or was he your only child?
Yeah, I have a daughter as well. She was 25 when he died. He was 22. So they're 3 years apart. They were super close. So this was devastating, obviously, to her as well. And what was important for me to understand, and something that's really important for listeners to hear, is that I knew very early on that we weren't actually even grieving the same person.
Right.
And what happens so often in our grief within a family or within a couple or relationship is we're very judgmental of how the other person is grieving. And that's what disrupts the relationship. And I knew really early on that we weren't going to do it the same way. I chose to be very public. That was what worked for me. She chose to be much more private. And ultimately, my son and her brother aren't the same person.
Right.
So that was really important for me to understand as well, that it was okay for us to do it differently and to honor the way each other were doing it. And we certainly did it together. Because she was living with me at the time. Ben still lived with me. And she was, as many kids that age did, lots of them came home because of COVID. She lived in Toronto across the country at the time. And I was like, no, I'm flying you home. You need to be here. Because I don't know what's coming, but it looks unpredictable. So she was here, which, obviously turned out to be a huge blessing. I can't even imagine what I would have done had she not been here. I can get myself to, I would have gotten on a plane to go tell her in person, but I can't get myself past that. So I'm very grateful that she was here. And we got to, figure it out together.
Right. Well, the other thing that you mentioned there is that you lost part of your own role as mother, right? Yeah. So when you only have one child and there's a rupture in the relationship, you're literally going through a rite of passage of no longer being a mother to that particular person, in your case, to Ben. You also mentioned that your brain stopped working. So that really perked me up, because I am now have awareness that, that whole period of time after that life rupture in my family with him, definitely there was a fog for a long time. So I'd love to have you speak a little bit more, particularly to that, because I also think that as we go through rites of passage, we have rites of passage of being born, going into teenagehood, graduating high school, getting married, all of those things, having your first baby, losing your first loved one. We all have these rites of passage that we have done our damnedest culturally to just make it to be so surface and not really the depth that it could be. So I'd love to have you speak to that, if you could, a little bit.
Yeah, the brain fog or grief brain is absolutely a real thing. And they're doing some actually really fascinating research where they're doing functional MRIs with grievers, looking at their brain as they're grieving. And what they're finding, which makes perfect sense to me, is that part of what's happening is that your brain is actually busy reprogramming itself. So we know so much now about neuroplasticity. And the way I explain it as a layperson who's experienced it is that as your brain is laying down those new pathways of your new reality, it fritzes up against your old reality. So you have that thought of, oh yeah, when I get home, I'll have to tell Ben that. And that fritzes up against that reality that you can't do that anymore. So there's almost this constant like going on in your head. And the other part of it, I think also is a little bit of a protective mechanism. I think your brain is really smart at understanding how much of reality you can hold in any given moment. And the fogginess actually helps to protect us a little bit from the brutal reality of our now post-apocalyptic nightmare. And I think those two things happen together. And as you say, over a long period of time, right? One of the things we need to disrupt in our understanding about grief is that sense that it's done by the funeral. It's over after your 3 days of leave from work. Like it's not. Early grief is about the first 2 years, really, that it takes to kind of get your legs back underneath you and get that sense of, you know, who am I now? Where do I go? What is my life without this person? Because the first year, we all know, impossibly hard. All those firsts, we were warned about those. That's one of the things we talk about. What people don't often talk about is that sometimes the second year is worse because you've expected the firsts to be hard. The reality is a little bit more grounded in what's happening in your life, and your person is still not there. So the seconds sometimes are even harder. And it's just really at the end of that you're kind of able to go, okay, like I feel like I kind of have my feet underneath me. For me, something really shifted at that 2-year mark. That really was like a shift in the way that I was able to navigate, which was super interesting to me. Because as I've kind of stayed a student of, you know, what's happening for me? How does that align with what happens for other people? My daughter tells a hilarious story of us trying to make a grilled cheese sandwich, which we all know is like our go-to for most of us anyway, a go-to easy meal, like takes 5 minutes. You don't have to think so hard. It took us 45 minutes to make a grilled cheese sandwich. The brain fog was like that. Like everything that was muscle memory, I didn't remember how to do.
Right.
I would stand in the shower going, okay,
what am I doing?
What do I do here? Okay, I'm wet, so I must be in the shower. This is good. And have I washed my hair yet? I'm not sure. Well, better wash it again, right? All those things that muscle memory, directions. I've lived in the city I live in since I was 8, which is kind of a long time. I know my way around without even thinking. I use my GPS all the time now. Right. Because I can't remember. I'm better now. But at the beginning, I couldn't get myself from A to B when I had been those places countless times before. Right. Sequential tasks, really hard. That's one of the things that shows up in the workplace. Right. You have to do A and then B and then C and then D. Oh, heaven help me. I could get to B and then I would be standing in a field by myself going, oh, shoot. I'm supposed to do something else, but I'm not really sure what it is. Right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, Suzanne. And when we come back, we are going to talk more about what companies can do to support people who are actively in the different stages of grief. But right now, we are going to take a commercial break. Wickedly Smart Women, we need your help. If you are enjoying this show, please consider joining our community, making a donation at wickedlysmartwomen.com and sharing with your lovely lady friends that might benefit from our content. Help a gal out. Let your sisters, mothers, daughters, friends, and colleagues know about the show so that we can serve them too. I want to say a big thank you to all of our listeners who are downloading, rating, and reviewing. I just did another update and we have 119 countries now. I am so excited to welcome our latest country, Malta. And we'll also shout out to our listeners in Vancouver, British Columbia, where Suzanne is, and to our listeners in Colombia. And we will be right back with Suzanne Jabour.
The Wickedly Smart Women podcast is brought to you by the Wealthy Life Mentor. Women, are you on the edge knowing that life is calling you to make a change? Are you ready to be part of the evolution of what it means to be a wickedly smart woman, creating your wealthy life by design? A life that is an extraordinary work of art. Anjel B. Hartwell, the Wealthy Life Mentor, is hired by women in transition. Women just like you who want to break through to their brilliance, become clear on the value of their wisdom, and embody a beauty-filled, balanced life of shameless self-expression. Discover your wealthy life readiness by taking the quiz at quiz.wealthylifementor.com.
And we are back with Suzanne Jabour. Before we went to the break, I told you I'd let you know where you could find out more about her. You can go to SuzanneJabour.com/podcasts, SuzanneJabour.com/podcasts, and you will find some wonderful information there for you on that site. And we will have that for you in the show notes. So Suzanne, before we went to the break, we talked about your work with corporations, like how you can go into corporations and help them to learn how to train the human resources folks, I guess, and executives, how to navigate when somebody is grieving. Is your specialty primarily grieving people who have lost a loved one, or do you also work with other realms of grief? Because sometimes it's not a death per se, but sometimes it's, like loss of relationship or other things that can create the grief response, right?
Yeah. And I think that's so important for people to understand, because grief comes from all losses. It's not necessarily going to be the same kind of grief I experienced because my son died, but there is going to be grief there. And what I think is important about that is that gives us the chance to practice. Mm-hmm. Because as a collective, we're not very good at this grief thing. Right? We don't know what to say. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to name it for ourselves even much of the time. So if we can practice with those other losses, some of them are bigger, right? The losses of relationships, the losses of a job, the losses of a business, of a home. Some of them are smaller, right? The losses of an opportunity, the losses of, your great parking spot, right? That's going to be a grief that you go, oh, kind of mad about that. And you can let it go and you immediately move on. What I help organizations do and businesses do is look at 3 aspects of how grief shows up in their workplace. So grievers bring it from their personal lives. Obviously, your team members have losses, sometimes of a loved one. That's most often when I get invited in because something catastrophic has happened and no one knows how to respond. The losses happen at the office. So if we could talk about, your quarterly earnings not being what you expected, the project launch not going the way you wanted, as things that stir up our emotions and create grief, that gives us a chance to practice as a collective. So we can, as a group, say, oh yeah, I'm mad about that too, or I'm feeling disappointed, or I'm feeling sad. We were really invested in this and it didn't go the way we wanted. And we have some feelings about that. The other place we need to be aware and watch out for is where it's happening in our clients and customers. And that can be really tricky. And it's super important because how we respond, especially if you're in an industry where either you're a company that's getting a lot of those phone calls, like all of those unspeakable calls you have to make to cancel accounts and close things and shift contact information, all of that. So you're either in that kind of a business, or if you're someone who's kind of a realtor/therapist or a hairdresser/therapist, right? Where you're having, while you're doing your job, really intimate conversations with your clients, then you need a special set of skills to be able to respond to that. So what I do with the organization is really look at, first of all, what's your leadership compassion level? Because if the leaders can't step forward with some honesty, with some vulnerability, with some compassion, then we don't have anywhere to go, because nobody on the team is going to be more honest or vulnerable than the leadership. So we have to start there. And we want to really shift from, empathy, where I'm putting myself into your shoes, to compassion, where I'm putting myself into your shoes and I want to take action. I want to help you carry this burden. I want to do something to make it better. So we want to shift into that action place where we're understanding what you're feeling is one piece, and then we want to do something about it. Then we need to look at our grief literacy level, if you will. Like, how well do we as a collective understand grief? Because what I hear a lot from frontline workers is this team is really great at grief, because likely someone on that team has had an experience where they've had to self-educate and learn about it. This team isn't any good. So this team is thriving. This team is struggling. We need to level that playing field so that everyone has some basic grief understanding and some basic vocabulary around how to talk about it, which, if we make a shared vocabulary, is even better. And then we want to look at what can you do in the workplace. So yes, lots of organizations, for example, have an employee assistance program. So we can refer you out to get a few counseling sessions with someone who can help you. That doesn't help you with the brain fog at your desk. So what can we do? Practical, easy, low cost or no cost things that help grievers reintegrate, help them understand that they're still a valued part of the team. And we're going to figure it out together, right? Hopefully, ideally, we're developing a policy together that says, here's this menu of things that we can offer you that we review on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, whatever it is, because your needs change over time. And I hear that from grievers often is they'll say, my boss was amazing and they took all these tasks away from me because they knew my capacity was limited, but there was nothing in place for me to get those tasks back. Or they took away the things I really loved. And so then I was just left with the stuff that wasn't that hard, but I also didn't really like it. And
right. So there was no communication in that case, right?
Communication isn't kept open. And that's because, workplaces have the same gap that we have as a collective.
Right.
We don't really want to talk about it. It's super uncomfortable. We might say the wrong thing. We might make it worse. You can't actually make it worse. You don't have that much power, but you do have the power to make it better. So it's about how can we work together to have these conversations, and they're going to be messy and they're going to be awkward because we're building our skills, and that's what building skills looks like. So we have to own that together. We don't know how to do this. We're learning. We're going to make mistakes, and we have to do it anyway.
Right. Beautiful. Well, listeners, in case you missed that, I want to make sure that you heard the three kind of areas where she works here with folks is she starts with the leader compassion level, and then goes to literacy, and then what's happening like at the desk with the grieving person and enhancing the communications and the practices that will allow everyone to, get their work done, but at the same time honor the passage that has happened and the fact that this person is grieving. So I want to, if you don't mind, go back just briefly to the brain fog thing, because that seems to really have my attention. And we've only got a couple of minutes left, but I want to talk about, from my perspective, now that we're having this conversation, a loss like that is shock trauma. And so, the word capacity is something that's in the trauma realm, and shock trauma, one of the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, it's like you've frozen or you have flown out, you've dissociated, and it makes sense. It makes total sense. So what I'd love to have you speak to, Suzanne, is how do we help people? Like, what are some of the very simple, maybe one or two simple things that you help people individually with to be able to transmute that trauma response, which is a physiological response. It's not an emotional necessarily response. It's a physiological response. Is there anything that is in your bag of tricks to help people to learn how to transmute that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that are really powerful. We can absolutely leverage technology. So when it comes to super practical things, you can use the alarms on your phone. You can make notes. You can use your GPS, right? You can use your map app. There's all of those things that really are on this little computer we carry around in our pocket that we can leverage much more powerfully than we do. That helps then create the space for you to do the trauma recovery work, which really for me is a lot about, staying conscious to it, staying aware of it, not trying to stuff it down. And really staying curious. That became my mantra, right? Conscious and curious. How am I going to do this? I'm going to hold all these emotions, even though they're massive and unwieldy. And I'm going to stay curious about what I can do next. What do I know? So there's lots of techniques around mindfulness. Breathing techniques are amazing. Getting out in nature, moving your body. And if you're in those early days where when I say something like that, you want to reach through whatever you're listening through and grab me by the throat and scream that that's the stupidest thing you ever heard, I hear you because I've been there. And as your capacity increases, that's where the peace comes from allowing it all, from letting it flow through you, staying attached to your body, right? Because your body knows all. And just using those tools, whatever makes you feel peaceful, do that. If it's a walk in nature, do that. If it's a cup of tea in front of the fire, do that. If it's talking with a friend, do that. If it's going and staring at the ocean, do that. Whatever it is that allows your body to calm down, and really slowing ourselves down is critical. especially when we're trying to navigate grief and the hustle and bustle. It's too much. And our body, as you say, physiologically, we're in overwhelm.
Right.
And it is a physical thing. Grief is a physical thing as well as an emotional thing. And you're physically tired.
Mm-hmm.
The ways that you can help your body recharge and just stay settled, all of those tools from your toolbox, you need them all.
Sure. Yeah. Well, for me, when the life rupture happened in my life, the nature was number one. Yeah. Nature was number one. And I spent hours. And I think part of the work too, for our listeners, any of you who are out there who may be experiencing grief yourself and are, now being awakened to some things you didn't maybe know about this process, it's really about reprioritizing everything and giving yourself permission and creating that space and time to do you in this. Not what the cookie cutter society expects, but for you to do you in this. Would you say that's correct, Suzanne? And we've got like a minute left. So if there's anything else you want to say, let's hear it from you.
Yeah, I just want to really amplify what you're saying about permission. Mm. We don't get permission from society to grieve. We don't get permission often from our friends and family. We have to give ourselves that permission to do exactly what is right for us in any given moment, and to let go of the concern about what anybody might think about it, because it doesn't matter.
That's truth. That is truth right there. Well, Suzanne, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I can tell that you are both passionate and prepared to help people in this realm in a beautiful way. Like, you're the most put together grief person I've met so far, and probably because of the training background, Yeah. So, it's beautiful that you have been able to transmute your grief into something that's a gift to the world. And so I applaud you for that. I'm going to ring my bell for you on that.
Yay!
All right, listeners, we do love feedback. Please let us know what you think of today's episode. Go right now to wickedlysmartwomen.com and join our community. Share your takeaways, ask questions, or submit guest suggestions. Thank you so much for tuning in. Keep your ears open, and remember, you are a wonderful woman.
Thanks for tuning in, downloading, and listening. Be sure to rate and review Wickedly Smart Women on Apple Podcasts and share with other women who can benefit from today's episode. Wickedly Smart Women is the premier podcast series for informing, activating, and inspiring the leader who carries profound wisdom and knows that now is the time to welcome wealth. We welcome your feedback and guest suggestions and invite you to subscribe to our mailing list to be notified of each new episode at wickedlysmartwomen.com.